Hello everyone. Today we're going to look at the poem Solitude. You will find this same document in the WhatsApp group. You can download it on your phone and follow along as you watch the video to make notes in your notebook, or alternatively you can ask a cousin or a friend or a brother or sister who's coming to school tomorrow, if you're not, to come and pick up a copy of the PDF from me. Okay, so whenever we start a poem, we start off with the title. The title is the first clue that a speaker or an author gives us as to the content of the poem. So our title is called Solitude, and whenever we look at a title, we have to consider two things. The first one is called denotation. This is the actual dictionary meaning of a word. It doesn't have any emotion attached to it. It is almost like the objective view of the word. So we know that solitude means, mostly it means to choose to be alone. But for our purposes, we're just going to say solitude means to be by yourself. Right. But we know poetry is all about emotion. So connotation is something that we always have to consider when we look at the title. Now in this case, we can actually look at two pathways. The first one is an emotionally positive feeling. I don't like to use positive or negative because in the exam it does trip us up, because we're not allowed to say it has a positive or a negative connotation. And therefore I'm just going to say good emotional connection. So the good emotional connection is that you choose to be alone. That means that you are trying to disconnect, you are trying to reflect, you are trying to just remove yourself from all of the negative or stimuli or impulses, and you are just making this choice. And solitude is definitely an emotional choice. Maybe you're making it for your emotional well-being. But then we get the idea that solitude equals lonely. And this time the emotions attached is not as positive as before. This time it is connected to a rejection, fear of missing out, disconnected in the sense that this was not your choice. This loneliness was placed upon you by others. Now, when we read this poem, we now have to go and figure out, is this poem about solitude as a choice, or does it seem like this is solitude placed on us by others, solitude placed on us by society, and then before we finish with the poem, we have to come back and just connect with the title again and say, you know what, this wasn't solitude, in other words, by choice, but rather loneliness or rejection. Rejection would have been a better title than solitude. That's a choice you need to go and make by the end of this poem. Right, so we've looked at the first clue, we've got some ideas, and now we can actually go ahead and read our poem. I'm going to highlight some words on while I read it, so that we can make a little glossary for ourselves. Laugh, and the world laughs with you. Weep, and you weep alone. For the saddled earth must borrow its mirth, but has trouble enough of its own. Sing, and the hills will answer. Sigh, it is lost on the air. The echoes bound to a joyful sound, and shrink to voicing care. Rejoice, and men will seek you. Grief, and they turn and go. They want full measure of all your pleasure, but they do not want your woe. Be glad, and your friends are many. Be sad, and you lose them all. There are none to decline your nectared wine, but all alone you drink life's gall. Feast, and your halls are crowded. Fast, and the world goes by. Succeed and give, and it helps you live, but no man can help you die. There's room in the halls of pleasure for a large and lordly train, but one by one we must all file on through the narrow aisles of pain. All right. Already, I think if we look back at our title, already we can go, listen, it seems to be leaning more towards this loneliness, this rejection, that your loneliness is placed on you by others. So right after the first reading of the poem, we already can make a few conclusions. Right, let's go and look at the word meanings here. Mirth is a word that refers to enjoyment. Okay, humor, laughing, really just a really good time. So mirth is a word that really refers to having a great time. The echoes bound, in this sense it's not bind. In other words, you are bound up, you are somehow prevented from moving. This bound means to jump from place to place, and it gives the idea that it's almost like a sound that grows. So if we look at the entire sentence, they say the echoes bound. So an echo is a repetition of a sound, but it seems like while this is happening, there's growth. The sound gets louder, gets larger. And then in the very next line, it says shrink, and this is just an antithesis, a contrast, some oppositeness. In this sense, something is wilting, something grows less, it is eliminated. So just a bit of a contrast between those words. Then we look at woe. Woe, oh, woe is me. And in Romeo and Juliet, never has there been a tale of such woe as our Juliet and her Romeo. So woe refers to sorrow, great sadness, grief. Nectared wine. So nectared wine refers to usually honeyed wine. In the olden days, they would add a little bit of sweetness to the wine to give it a better taste. So we can say honey and wine. And it was quite a popular drink. People enjoyed it. It was presented at parties, especially dinner parties. And then we look at the word gall. Now, gall refers to a substance that is created in your liver, and more specifically by the gallbladder that is in your liver. And this substance helps to break down the food in your stomach. It adds to our stomach acid. So again, look at the contrast between nectared wine, sweet, inviting, and then gall, which refers to acid, and it is something that we recognize as a very bitter taste. All right, so already we get so many ideas just from where this poem is headed at the moment. Right, the next thing that we always do when we look at a poem as I ask you, what is the story of the poem? Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of background. Our poem was written by Ella Wheeler Wilcox, and she was on her way to some very fancy ball in, I think, Wisconsin or Arkansas or somewhere in colonial America. And she was very excited. Think Bridgerton, think party, think beautiful dress and gossip and intrigue and love and romance and all of that. And she gets on the train and she's so excited about going to this party. And on the train, she meets a woman who is going to a funeral. And she starts speaking to this woman, and our speaker, our poetess, starts to lose all of that enthusiasm. The more she speaks to the lady, the sadder she gets, and by the time she arrives at her destination, all that excitement was gone, all of it taken up by this other person's misery. And to commemorate all of this, Ella Wheeler Wilcox writes a poem just to kind of describe what has happened and how it has influenced her. So this is really the background for it. But if we have to look at the summary of this poem, I think maybe this summary or the story is that if you are happy, then it seems to attract people. Sorry about that. You seem to attract people. And yet, when you are sad, you are very much alone. And she reflects on just how this is just a universal truth. This just seems to be the way that humans are wired. We are very much attracted by joy and fun and entertainment, and we are very much pushed away by the idea of loneliness or sadness or even being in a situation where you have to deal with loneliness and sadness. So, okay, that is our story. And you will see that even though we have 3 different stanzas, they all seem to just echo the same idea. And because I just mentioned stanzas, you know that part of our analysis always looks at structure as well. So very, very easy structure for us. There are 3 stanzas, and each one of the stanza has 8 lines, and we call that an octave. And then we have a very interesting rhyme pattern. It goes A, B, C, and then there's a rhyming word. So A, B, C, B, and then it gets repeated. D, E, F, E. So definitely an idea that there is some kind of rhyming in here. And it's also interesting that we have internal rhyme as well. So you will know that alliteration is the repetition of consonant sounds in words that are very close to each other. But then we also have assonance. And assonance talks about a repetition of a vowel sound. And this poem, I really like the way that it's so very prominent in this poem. So if you look at just these lines right at the beginning, it says, "The sad old earth must borrow its mirth." So you have that sound that just repeats itself. The echoes bound to a joyful sound. So assonance is sometimes even called inline rhyme. So while we're busy talking about sounds, I thought I'd just mention some inline rhyme, and I also got the chance to say assonance 3 times. Right, we're going to look at the line by line analysis. The first thing that I want you to notice throughout the poem, I'm just going to mark the first 4 lines, but you will see that this pattern gets repeated throughout the poem. So throughout the poem, we are dealing with a line or 2 lines. That is not what I wanted to do. There we go. a line that deals with happiness, and then immediately contrasted with a line that deals with sadness, with sorrow. So laugh and the world laughs with you, weep and you weep alone. And as you continue, you see, okay, for the saddled earth must borrow its mirth. We know mirth means happiness, enjoyment, entertainment, because it has trouble enough of its own. So again, trouble, sadness, sorrow, and so forth. And as you go along, you will see that this contrast happens throughout. So if you're happy, you sing and the hills answer. Unfortunately, if you are sad, then your sigh is lost on the air, and then echoes grow and bound and jump from one to another, and yet when you are sad, everybody seems to shrink away from you. So we have this constant contrast, and we could almost say that this is a paradox. This is the truth of life. It's interesting that two such opposing things are true about life. When you're happy, you always seem to be surrounded by people who are happy alongside with you. But when you're sad, it's something that you almost deal with alone. It doesn't necessarily mean that nobody's there to help you. I think we've all gone through very difficult times where we were surrounded by people supporting us and helping us. And yet, to go through that fear, to go through that anxiety was a very lonely experience. So please go ahead, read through the rest of it as well, and you will see that these pairs, these contrasting pairs, are found throughout. I quickly want to just focus on line 3, because we do have another literary device. It's not a sound device this time, but more like a figure of speech. So for the sad old earth, right? So here we're actually dealing with two things. The sad old earth is doing something that we would associate with people, and therefore the first thing we can say about this line is that there is personification. Now, what is the point of personification? Well, as humans, we tend to associate and connect more with something or someone because they are personified, because we have a shared experience, because we can go, oh, I felt that. So when we personify things, we're trying to create connections for humans. So that's the reason why we personify. Also look at the opposite of that, when we dehumanize, when we objectify, how emotions suddenly disappear. So personification is a very powerful tool. But this is also an example of synecdoche. I know, what a word. Synecdoche. All right. It does not say synecdoche. All right. Synecdoche is a part of speech which we deal with where a part of something represents the whole of something. For example, if we say something like South Africa lost the game with 6 wickets, that doesn't mean like literal wickets. We know immediately, wickets represents cricket, and therefore we can make that connection. A similar example could be a message was shared by the crown today, and we know the crown is a symbol, is representative of the king, and therefore we make that connection. So here when they say the sad old earth must borrow its mirth, it's an example of how the world works. So it's not an actual thing. The earth isn't doing something, but the earth represents us all. So just have that in mind. It's a really good line to use in a poetry exam, because of the personification and the synecdoche. But please, if you move through the document, you'll see there it is as well. There are some more examples of it. All right. An important thing of this line, though, is that the poet seems to make some kind of summation here, an observation. And by saying the saddled earth, the whole of the world is doing it, it is almost saying like sadness, sorrow is a natural state. It is, even the earth feels it. Sorrow is part of who we are. It is something that we have to deal with. So a very powerful line by our poet. We can go ahead and notice in the next few lines, sing and sigh, two opposing words, but you will also see that the poet tried to use alliteration and connect those words. So singing, denotation, just making musical sounds with your voice, while as singing, if we look at connotation, just refers to so much more. And sigh, again, sigh is just letting air out, but it's just connected. That connotation is so deeply ingrained with negative feelings. I've never heard someone said, oh, I sighed with joy. Maybe with relief, but not really joy. And so you will see as we go along, these same things occur. There really isn't much more to say about it. Just that the poet is really trying to repeat the same idea throughout. We can look at stanza 2, the same things happen. We go from rejoice to grief. We go from pleasure to woe. We go from glad to sad, and then this one again, what a beautiful image. Sorry, my English teacher is showing here. It's just, for me, it's the most effective contrast throughout, because this is a very beautiful image. Right. So do you remember how an image is different from just a literary device like a simile or a metaphor personification? That's right. I did feel like Dora the Explorer right there. You're absolutely right. An image refers to our senses. It's when a description is so well created that we can almost taste or see or smell or feel the image. So this is a beautiful image. So not only is it a contrast and opposite, you also have the idea of the sense. So the sweetness and the bitterness, and how happiness and joy is connected to sweet, and how the rest of it is just awful. Right, our final stanza is the culmination. It is the climax of the poem. Yes, we have a repetition of stanza 1 and 2, but it's almost like the images grow in stature. There are also more of them. There's a myriad of new literary devices. Again, we have alliteration, as we can see here, feast and fast and emphasis, which are also references to images, feasting, the joy of eating together, the idea of party, company, togetherness, feasting, whereas fast means almost how something is withheld from you, how you don't have access to it. It's something that you personally experience. So these contrasts seems to grow, and it's almost like at the beginning they were contrasts, but now they seem to be on polar ends, extreme opposites from one another. So stanza 3 really is the culmination of the poem, the climax. All right. There are two things that I just want to just have a quick look at. It seems like if you're happy, that it's almost like you are rewarded for it. And this is referred to when we look at diction. Remember that this is very important in poetry analysis sorry, analysis. So the word feast is a word we associate with a success. It's the celebration dinner. So feast. You are also surrounded by others, and this we see over here. That there is a hall of pleasure. It's not just one or two people at this party. It is just a whole group there to support you. On the other hand, if you are sad, it almost seems like the complete opposite of it. Here you are now completely alone. There's no person there. A very powerful word that we have to look at in this stanza is this word over here, die. It's not a physical death, it's metaphorical. It talks about how in moments of complete and utter sorrow, you feel weighted down, you feel distant, you feel disconnected, and it's almost like an emotional death. It's completely being cut off and isolated, and that's why it feels like death. But look on this side, happiness feels like life. So these are the extreme opposites that I spoke of. The last thing that I'm just going to leave you with is the metaphor the poet creates in the final stanza. And she says that if your life is like a house, right? Your house has many rooms, some really, really large rooms, and especially in old mansion-like homes back then, you would have a ballroom, so filled with people who can come and visit and have a party and joy and music and dancing. But as you connect between the rooms in your house, as you connect with other times in your life, it's almost like you go through an aisle. And they say if you're moving through this aisle to this next moment of joy in your life, there only seems to be place for one person. So in moments of happiness, in moments of complete joy, you are filled to the brim by people and company and success and joy and feasting. But as you move through these narrow aisles, these corridors, there's no place for anybody else on this journey. You have to crawl through these darkened rooms alone. And this is the last four lines of the poem. You find this metaphor. So you really go and look at that. It's a favorite question to ask. Discuss the effectiveness of the metaphor in the last stanza. Now, if you need to refer to anything else, or if you feel like I did leave some things out, or you did not quite understand a certain metaphor, please go and have a look, read through your notes. You will see that there's a very important part to this. It's called the four square analysis. It's a really helpful tool because it looks at four very important things: imagery and sound, tone, and then of course structure and theme. So if you can go and create a four square for every one of your poems, it's a really helpful tool just to study for poetry and really to get an understanding of a poem in one glance. All right. Also very helpful, there are some questions. There's an essay question, some contextual questions, and then thankfully also some answers. So please work through it, see what you can look at, see what you can find, and then if you have any questions, I'm available on WhatsApp at any time. So I hope that was helpful. And I hope that made some sense. And luckily, it is a fairly simple poem to understand, but it is so rich in imagery and just beautiful contrasts that seem to grow in intensity. Where we start and just say laugh and weep, to where we move up the line to live and die, and halls of pleasure versus aisles of sadness or aisles of pain. Such rich and beautiful references and literary devices. And those are the things that we like to ask you about.